Welcome to my look at the Amazing Spider-Man movie. I apologize for it being a little late, and there will be some spoilers, though hopefully nothing overly big. Spider-Man is typically a little different than your typical comic book hero. He has superpowers, but the majority of his fights are won by using his smarts in conjunction with his powers. In fact, he is one of the few comic heroes out there that didn't have training prior to putting on the mask. In addition to his unique method of handling things is a strong sense of guilt and responsibility for his actions. It is often overlooked, but really Spider-Man has a darker origin than Batman. I know Batman's origin has been rewritten several times now, and basically to make it out to seem like it was his fault that his parents had to leave the theater and ultimately died. But even then, it is far less disturbing than having a parent, for all intents and purposes, killed because you didn't take action due to revenge. In any case, Spider-Man has many great stories, cartoon series, and comics. Sadly, his movies don't quite do it for me. Let's start by going over the first three films. The first movie was a bit of a disappointment. I didn't really mind Tobey Maguire all that much. Was he the best choice? Probably not, but there are far worse out there. And I thought William Dafoe was actually a pretty good Norman Osborn, despite the horrible Green Goblin costume. What hurt the film for me was the writing and the dialogue. Not only were most of the characters just seem like cardboard cutouts of their archetype, but they totally missed what the characters are like in the comics. Mary Jane Watson was smart and clever while still a party girl in the comics. The Green Goblin was incredibly smart and very much insane. Harry Osborn was just as nerdy as Peter, but really without his backbone or moral foundation. In the end, the movie was your typical superhero movie. Basically, the first half of the movie being the origin, and the hero proves that he's awesome. He fails against his first fight against the supervillain of the day, and then he comes back and wins in the second fight. No real clever way of him taking down the opponent. It just resulted in basically a fisticuffs. And that was actually pretty much the case throughout the entire movie. The second movie was probably a bigger disappointment than the first for me. Sure, the action scenes improved greatly over the first, but again, it fails to capture what made the characters great. Mary Jane once more is the damsel in distress. Doc Ock is totally miswritten, and ultimately, it is the same movie as the first. The third movie was only made so that the set of movies could be called a trilogy, or potentially in the contract somewhere. There really isn't a main villain, which is actually something that I liked in the movie, but all it ended up doing was, instead of dropping the ball with one villain, they did it with three. Oh, and Mary Jane gets captured yet again. Now for the Amazing Spider-Man movie itself, which, while not as disappointing as the first three films, I can't say I liked it. Why, oh why, can't Hollywood be more creative when it comes to an origin story? If you must cram the origin down our throats once more, then please at least do it in a different way. Take a cue from the Spectacular Spider-Man cartoon and spread out the origin throughout the entire movie. Have Spider-Man be taking down some thugs initially, potentially introduce the villain, then have Spider-Man, I don't know, run into the guy who shot Uncle Ben. That way you have established the character. You can do the origin in about a 5-minute flashback. And, all would be well. But sadly, that's not the case, and we actually have to drudge through the origin again. Despite its differences, it's still the same thing. Let's take a look at the characters. First up, Peter Parker, who is Spider-Man, spoilers, who I think actually looks the part better than Tobey, but is written somewhat out of character. I don't think the whole "with great power comes great responsibility" thing ever really caught on. He is pretty loose with his secret identity as well. More on that later. His intelligence is also something that seems to have gone missing. The electronic lock in his room is pretty much the only thing used to indicate he is smart. Everything else comes from notes from his father or notes from Curt Connors. I don't expect him to be a rocket scientist, but he is supposed to use his head more than his brawn. Gwen Stacy is probably the best character in the movie. I don't think she is ever captured, though, or at least I don't remember her ever being captured, though she should have been in one scene, and she even proves to be smarter than Peter most of the time. My only real complaint with the character is that she doesn't figure out Peter is Spider-Man. She has to be told or actually shown. Personally, it worked a lot better in the comics, where she doesn't know who he is until she dies, which adds more tension, especially when her father dies. Speaking of which, Captain Stacy is a character that got totally messed up here. In the comics, Captain Stacy was one of the few cops who didn't see Spider-Man as a threat. He respected him, even worked with him a few times. While he might not like the mask, he understood why Spider-Man wore it. When he was killed in the comics, yet another death technically Spider-Man's fault, it was in the line of duty saving civilians. In the movie, instead of going up to the tower with a squad of policemen, he goes alone and with a shotgun. He is also more intent on getting Spider-Man than the giant lizard that turned some cops into lizard and running around the city. His last words to Peter in the comic were about protecting and loving Gwen, which was a surprise since Peter didn't know he knew who he was. His death is a very good story, well worth the trade all in itself. But in the film, he told Peter to stay away from Gwen. Really a true ruining of a great character from the comics. Last character is Curt Connors the Lizard, another character that they got all wrong. In the comics, Curt Connors was a respectable scientist who basically just wants his arm back. He has been a reoccurring villain for many years now, but somewhat recently he has been written rather dark. Heck, he even kills his own son, all on his own. On his own. Well, knowing full well that he was doing it. In the film, not only is his wife and kid not present or even mentioned, but which by the way was the driving force behind him wanting his arm back in the comics in the first place, but he is also not that great of a geneticist. The worst thing is, he is the same as all the other big baddies in the other films. A respectable scientist turned evil. Why can't they just write a villain that is evil for the heck of it. One of my biggest complaints about superhero movies in general is the fact that the heroes are always so unprotected or unprotective of their secret identity. 4 people in this movie learn or are told who Spider-Man is. Probably even more so from a realistic standpoint, seeing as how often he takes off his mask. There is about the same number of people who know who Peter is in the comics, but that is with 50 plus years worth of material, or at least in the Spider-Man mythos. At least recently a bunch of superheroes and all that know, but just his circle of villains and friends. He even reveals his face to a kid in the movie for no real reason, which I have to refer to Bruce Wayne's comment on why that is such a bad thing.
What were you thinking?
He would have died. There was no other way.
There's always another way.
I don't see what you're so worried about. He's probably forgotten what I look like by now.
That doesn't matter. What matters is that other people think he knows what you look like. You've made that little boy a target.
Now, I know most of my complaints stem off from the differences between the comic and the movie, and they are often considered invalid because of it. I mean, it is someone else's vision of the character and whatnot. I have no problems with the movies changing up how events occur. There are a lot of things in the comics that just can't be explained in a 2-hour movie, and there has to be a fair balance between what has happened and what is happening in the series for familiarity. In addition to the fact that generally a 20-page comic or, whatever, a 4-issue story or whatever is pretty short when you're trying to stretch things out to a 2-hour film as well. But, however, it is the characters and their stories that made the Spider-Man character popular enough to warrant a movie in the first place. Why did they have to change Captain Stacy's character? The retelling would have been the same, if not better, if they went with how it was in the comics. So why resort to old Hollywood cliches when the other has proven to be so very successful? I give kudos for the web shooters in this version, but it takes away so much from the character since he didn't make it himself. How did he get all that from Oscorp anyhow? In the comics, he discovered the formula for the webs using compounds used in developing film, which is something he had laying around since he was a photographer. Since he created the webs, he was able to alter the formula in various ways to help him out as needed. In the film, really, everything is given to him, and it really undermines the character. The film is by no means a bad flick, but it is only marginally better than the original 3 films. For fans of the comics, this might be hard to sit through, especially after seeing what they could actually do in the Avengers movie. I didn't feel bad about spending the money on the ticket, just I will be hard pressed to do so again. As always, thanks for watching, and God bless.